Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we're exploring a truly fascinating piece of history drawn directly from our source material on the Shinshu silk industry. We usually think of a nation's modernization in terms of massive steel mills, steam trains, and sprawling metropolitan factories. But what if I told you that the foundation of one of the world's most rapid industrial transformations wasn't forged in heavy iron, but woven from something incredibly delicate? Today, we're unpacking how an everyday item, literally a simple thread of silk, changed global history and built modern Japan. It sounds like a complete paradox, doesn't it? How exactly did a small farming village, hidden way deep in the Japanese Alps, end up financing the modernization of an entire empire? Well, that's the core question we're tackling today. We're going to take a micro to macro journey, tracing how the tiniest biological product from a remote, quiet region funded a nation-state's massive leap into the modern era. So to understand how Japan connected to the world stage, we've got to start by zooming all the way in. Section 1. The power of one thread. So our story begins in the 19th century in Shinshu, which is modern-day Nagano Prefecture. Picture this: deep forests, beautiful lakes, and towering mountains. Because flat ground was so extremely limited out there, surviving on rice cultivation alone just wasn't a viable option. So what was the survival strategy for these local farmers? Silk culture, the practice of raising silkworms. It very quickly became the absolute lifeblood of these households. And the absolutely crucial point here is that the starting point of this massive nation-building industry wasn't some giant smoke-billowing factory. No, it was the living rooms and backyards of rural farmhouses. These individual homes were the very first threads in weaving a totally new economic destiny for rural Japan. And this brilliantly illustrates how this micro-level household ecosystem functioned as a perfectly synchronized supply chain. First, farmers cultivated the mulberry field, which is vital because mulberry leaves are literally the only food silkworms eat. Then came the incredibly careful, labor-intensive process of raising the worms themselves, followed by the production of the cocoons. And finally, they delicately reeled the raw silk thread right from those small cocoons. From start to finish, this created a completely self-sustaining economic sphere right there in the villages, long before a single thread ever even reached a merchant's hands. Section 2. Adapting Western silk technology. All right, let's shift to the macro scale. Back in the mid-19th century, Japan's Meiji government was in an absolute rush to modernize. To survive on the global stage and to buy Western steel, machines, and technology, they desperately needed foreign currency, and that meant selling something the rest of the world actually wanted: raw silk. That intense international demand drove industrialization at just a staggering pace. In 1859, the Yokohama port opens to global trade. By 1872, the government establishes the Tomioka silk mill using imported French technology. But then, just 3 years later in 1875, a local invention called the Suwa-style machine changes the game entirely. The result? By 1909, Japan completely surpasses China and Italy to become the #1 global exporter of silk. Now, what's really interesting here is the stark contrast in how that rapid growth was actually achieved. On one hand, you have the massive imported European machinery used at the government-run mills. These were expensive, inflexible, and honestly, basically just direct copies of French and Italian models. But on the other hand, we have the ultimate plot twist: the Suwa-style reeling machine. Invented by a local man named Take Daijiro in 1875, it was wooden, extremely low cost, and compact. You see, the locals in Shinshu didn't just blindly copy the West. They tailored the tech to fit perfectly inside a rural Japanese home, while still producing incredibly high-quality silk. A cheap, wooden, locally made contraption completely outperforming massive factory equipment. It's brilliant. Section 3. Okaya, the silk capital. The invention of that Suwa-style machine was a massive catalyst. It took a quiet lakeside village and totally transformed it into a roaring industrial hub known as Shito, the silk capital. To give you an idea of how incredibly fast this happened, let's look at Katakura Ijisuke. Back in 1873, he started a silk business with a humble, hand-operated 10-person reeling system. Well, from that tiny operation, his family built the Katakura silk spinning empire. And as their business exploded, so did Okaya. You see, silk didn't just build factories. The wealth it generated built banks, schools, local railways, and modern transportation. It literally turned a rural farming area into a true modern city. And the sheer scale of this single city's output is just mind-blowing. By 1924, Nagano Prefecture was the undisputed top raw silk producing region in all of Japan. But incredibly, out of all the exported raw silk coming out of Nagano, 60% of it was coming from Okaya alone. Just think about that. This one single city, nestled in the mountains, was carrying the massive weight of the nation's most critical export industry squarely on its shoulders.
Section 4. Women behind the machines.
Up until now, we've talked a lot about data, machines, and economics. But factories don't run themselves, do they? We simply cannot tell the story without the people. 34,500. Take a moment to let that number really sink in. By the year 1930, that was the population of kōjo, young female factory workers living and working in Okaya. They came from all over the country, leaving their hometowns to earn money and support their families. It was the compounded human effort of these tens of thousands of young women that was the actual engine driving Japan's modernization. The reality of life for the kōjo inside these factories was highly complex, and our source material paints a very nuanced picture. On one hand, you have the incredibly harsh realities of early industrial labor. The working hours were exceptionally long, and the manual labor, like constantly finding the ends of silk threads in hot water all day, was strict, exhausting, and highly repetitive. But on the other hand, as time progressed, these factories became more than just grueling workplaces. They actually offered unexpected educational opportunities. The women were provided classes in math, reading, and using the abacus. They learned traditional arts like flower arrangement and tea ceremony alongside sewing. For many young women away from home for the very first time, it became a vibrant, tightly knit community. It was a multifaceted life that really broke the mold of grim, one-dimensional factory work.
Section 5. The legacy of Japanese silk.
Let's move to our final section and see how all of this builds into Japan's modern identity. Now, while the global demand for silk did eventually fade due to synthetic fibers and war, the impact of what happened in those mountain towns absolutely didn't disappear. You see, the constant evolution of those reeling machines, taking a foreign concept, scaling it up, making it smaller, cheaper, and continuously better, was the birthplace of monozukuri. This is the profound Japanese philosophy of craftsmanship. It's the mindset of importing something foreign, relentlessly adapting it to your local environment, and refining it over and over until you've created something superior. That exact spirit, born right there in the silk mills of Okaya, remains the absolute bedrock of Japanese manufacturing today. Today, the Okaya Silk Museum preserves over 30,000 artifacts, acting as a true guardian of this history. When you look at the wood, the metal, and the gears of those preserved machines, the abstract concept of modernization suddenly becomes incredibly tangible. It's a fantastic reminder of exactly why this history matters to us today. True innovation doesn't just happen in high-tech, well-funded labs. It happens when everyday people adapt to their unique circumstances and strive to build something better. Which brings us to our final thought for today, drawn perfectly from the narrative of our source material. Thousands of fragile threads woven together possess the power to change an era. It's a profound reminder, isn't it? A single thread of silk or a single day of work from a kōjo might seem incredibly fragile and small on its own, but when thousands of them are compounded, when individual efforts are woven together with ingenuity and determination, they have the power to literally build a modern nation. So what small, everyday threads are you weaving in your own life that, when compounded, might just create massive change? Think about that and keep learning.